I'm Shirley Adams, bringing you Adams Appliques, usually pronounced applique. This is program number 11 of the series. Appliques have really been popular lately, such as the one I'm holding. And for fun additions, they're great for sweats and sweaters, tees, and just about any article of clothing. They're fast and easy, and everyone can do them successfully. They're great to add to existing garments or to incorporate in the planning stage. Mainly used in leisure clothes, casual fun items, new products have made them a cinch for non-artists to do. And if you haven't tried that yet, here's how to do it. First of all, I'm going to take a little scrap of this same zebra print fabric that I have on the t-shirt. And you can see it's printed on front side only. And I'm going to fuse that to the t-shirt or to a scrap of it first, and then I'm going to embellish it afterwards with a little foliage, because those zebras look like they're kind of out in the open, and we better cover them up with some things to protect them a little bit. So I'm going to go to the press and fuse this down. So I'll put the right side of the fabric down on the press, and I'll put the fusible side of the transfer web down on that and give it a little bit of heat here and a little pressure, and then I'm going to in a second fuse it to this, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, here it's all fused in place, so I'll put the t-shirt fabric down on top, and then with the t-shirt down I can peel off this web or this transfer sheet, and I'll put this down and give it another little shot of heat and get it to fuse. Now, I've already cut out a couple little strips of the suede, the ultra suede that I'm going to put on top of it. What makes this so nice to use is the fact that ultra suede, of course, doesn't ravel, it doesn't have any raw edges, and you can simply stitch it down. Now, notice with the grass that I have on here, the foliage I already have on the original t-shirt, notice how it's in curvy lines. I didn't cut it that way. One of the nice things about any of these synthetic suedes is that you can push them into a curve as you stitch. So to stitch this, I would simply put it down and start stitching at any point and curve it as I go. So I'm on a straight stitch here, and as I stitch along, see how I'm curving this slightly? And I can bring it back the other way if I prefer it. And after I carefully take this right down to the point and get the needle in so that I can lift it and turn it, then it's just turning it around and coming back up the other side. And you can see that really is easy to do. There's no way you can go too wrong. Everybody can do that very well. And then I'd simply turn it again and go down the other and curve it some different ways so that when I get through with the whole piece, it looks very much like the t-shirt that was down here. So you can see how quick, how easy it was to embellish this, and it's fun, and it's a good way to use up any of the scraps that you have. So one way you might do it, little fusing, little stitching, and you're all ready to go with something just really wonderful, something that you'll have a lot of fun wearing. The next one that I have here on the rack has used a little ultra leather, which is another product very similar but with a smooth leathery surface instead of suede. That one can be done in the very same way in that it's fused in place. And what I have here is not a sample of the leather, it's a sample of ultra suede, but it really doesn't make a bit of difference because it's going to be used the same way. So here's the sweater, and I have this, it looks like maybe something from South America, ancient societies. What it actually is just taking a piece of Wonder Under. With a pencil, I'm starting to draw a maze. I started out on this sweater also to just have a very small rectangle like this, but by the time I cut it all apart later on, it covered most of the sweater because I have so many spaces in between. So here I've just drawn a few lines. You do it on the smooth side with a pencil. If you would be working on the fusible side, the rough side, use a pen so that it'll come off. And then after I have these pieces drawn, I'll simply cut them out and fuse them to perhaps, if I would fuse the whole piece, pardon me, I better show you that, I guess. If I would be fusing this whole piece in one color, I'll just fuse the whole thing before I cut anything out so that you can see how I actually did it. So I'm going to put this over on the press. And remember, I've told you before, anytime you use the synthetic suedes or leathers, it's a very good idea for you to put a press cloth over it to protect them, to make sure that you don't ruin the surface texture of them. So this time I have the press cloth on top. Give it a few seconds so that it will fuse down, and then I'll be ready to cut around this. I didn't give it enough seconds is what happened. So you can see you do need a little bit more pressure. So give it as much time as it needs, but then I would cut through both the web and the suede in the background before I peel off the paper and before I then fuse it down to the other fabric. So it's kind of done the same way as I did the zebras, therefore there's no sense in dwelling on it and taking any more time with it. But fun way to do it. So see what you can do just by making all kinds of neat shapes and putting them on. Here's another one, and this one was done by the same technique, but a little warning I'd like to give you on this. If you do great big designs like this, you want to, of course, how do you get in on an existing sweater? How do you get underneath all this? It goes down the sleeve, it goes down the front and across the back. Well, obviously, you just crinkle up some fabric, something bulky, a terry towel is nice, and stuff it inside so that it goes inside the sleeve and under the sweater. And in doing that, then you can have that curved surface and you can fuse to it very easily. But what I did on this is, first of all, down here on the table, and I'll bring the sweater down next to it, first of all, I drew my design, this great big floral design that's going to be all over the sweater. I drew that on some Wonder Under. But what I did, so I wouldn't lose my place later on, which is so easy to do if you do a whole lot of petals like this, what I did was number them, just like a clock. I put 1 in the middle, and then 2 goes over here, and 3, 4, I went counterclockwise on this. But I numbered all these pieces so that after I had them all cut out and fused each one individually to a different color fabric, in this case I used suede for all those little petals. After I had them all fused, then I'd know how to put it back so it wouldn't be like a puzzle and I'd wonder where I started. As long as the numbers are there, you know exactly where you're going. But something additionally I did to this, if you have a really huge design here and have it all suede, it's really stiff and heavy, and it just moves a lot better. It's a lot softer if you cut it up, and besides it makes it look so much more artistic. So all those abstract petals that I made, notice here that number 5 petal, for instance, before I fused that down, I made a couple of other little lines through that petal and cut them apart, and so that when I fused it down and cut it out, there's a space. Here's that same number 5 petal here done in blue, but there's a space between all the pieces, and that keeps it soft. Now after this is done, if you're never going to wash it or dry clean it, it's done after you've fused it. But I'm going to put this through the washer and dryer where it's been many times. Therefore, I am going to just stitch around the edge as I did on that original piece of ultra suede on the zebras, so that it makes sure that it'll always stay in place very well. You don't have to be an artist to do this, remember. You just find a picture in a magazine, on some fabric, some print fabric. You can find wonderful foliage on big, oversized prints. You can find something that you can trace very easily because those fusible transfer sheets are very thin. You can see through them. It's very easy to trace. If you're going to do anything for a child, how about a coloring book? And with the coloring book, you can find very simple line drawings that you can trace also on the transfer sheets, and then fuse them to different colors of fabrics. And after they're all fused, then also stitch those down. Great way to do it. You don't have to be an artist at all to do that. If you're doing this fusing for adults, there are adult coloring books too. And this one has wonderful butterfly line drawings all the way through it. They would be gorgeous, done in fabrics or in suedes. So find yourself some adult coloring books, or here again, fabrics. Make some good line drawings, and you can trace whatever's on them very well. This one came from a commercial pattern, though, this little child's t-shirt that I made. This was a commercial pattern that had this funny looking little sheep on it, and it makes me smile. I hope it does her too when she sees it. So it's kind of abstract too, but funny little pear-shaped looking sheep. Well, with this one I also just fused it down with the transfer web, and after I had it completely fused, then I did a satin stitch around the edge just to finish, because this is fabric. It's woven fabric and it will ravel. So I wanted to therefore put a satin stitch all the way around so that it covers that edge completely, and there won't be any raveling then afterwards. So that's the difference between using woven fabric and using the suedes that don't ravel at all. If you wanted to do something different than just fusing it flat as I did here, let's say for instance that it might tickle that little one very much if you'd put a squeaker in there. So if you think they would like something of that sort, which you can buy in craft shops, fabric shops, if you think you'd like that, it's a good idea because this is not going to be fused. This little sheep is not going to be fused to the t-shirt. You can't fuse it when you have this squeaker in the background. Everything would melt. You'd be in trouble. So when I'm going to not fuse it, this is a very ravelly cotton fabric that I used on the first sheep, and I'm doing the same one in a different color on this. It really ravels out very easily. So if I'm not going to fuse it in place before I satin stitch it, I would like to cover the back of it with some tricot fusible, some interfacing. That's easy knit that I have, and I've already fused on the back of this piece some of the easy knit so that it will now be able to be cut out, and with the knit backing there, the raveling won't occur. So I've done that to this piece of fabric, and I've gone beyond that. I've also already fused to some suede the face and the ears, and you can see here it's all fused then in place. So this is ready to go. All I'm going to have to do then is put a pattern on this. Here's a pattern simply traced on paper because there's going to be no fusing with this. So I would just put a pattern, and I would put it over the spot where I have the head and the ears and cut around that, which I've already done here to hurry it up a little bit. And so this then I would put down on top of the squeaker, put that in the bottom, put this on top, get it all pinned around, and then you could stitch this on by machine and satin stitch it in place. And I think they'd like that. It's a fun thing to do to their t-shirts or to bibs, something of that sort. It gives a great deal of pleasure to someone who would like to have it from you. This is another t-shirt that I've done with some applique, and this one has been done not with fusing on because I wanted it to puff out a little bit. I wanted something there, some substance, some third dimension there. So what I did with this, instead of fusing it on, is simply cut the fabric or the flower that I'm going to have. Instead of cutting it out completely, I just cut a circle there because this is the quick, easy way to do it. And I'm all for doing anything possible a quicker way if I can figure out how. So what I'm doing on that t-shirt is this. I am first of all, here's the t-shirt back here, get everything else out of the way. Here's the t-shirt. I won't get this out of the way because you've seen me use this before. This is one of those tearaway stabilizers that you use anytime you're going to do some stitching on a soft fabric like this t-shirt fabric. You could put it in a hoop, but it isn't always convenient to do that, especially when you have a very big piece. So I'm going to put it on top of this. And I want this three-dimensional, remember, so I'm going to pad it out here with a little bit of this fiber fill. Just quilt batting is what it is that I have here. So I've just taken off a piece and spread it out here. And then I'm going to put on top of that quilt batting just a circle of the fabric. And I've already made sure in advance that this circle of fabric is big enough that it will be more than the size of the flower that I'm using. It'll more than cover it up. And if you're wondering, well, where did I get this pretty morning glory? As I said, it can come from anywhere. I have a print of this at home. It was done about 2 centuries ago, I think, by a Chinese artist. And it was just pretty morning glories. I simply traced it over the glass and did it on this. So see, you don't have to be an artist. Everybody can do this. Okay, so I'm going to stitch this down first, and then I'm going to tear away the stuff and do a little satin stitching later. But I also want on that morning glory a center, as you see here. Here's the center that I want on that to show that it is a morning glory. So on that particular thing, I did fuse the transfer sheet down with the design drawn on it. I fused it down to some t-shirt fabric. I then cut it out, and it's been cut here. And then you peel off, you can see the lines yet where it's been cut. Then you peel off that transfer sheet that you don't want. That's just thrown away unless you want to keep it for a pattern for something else. And then I'm going to put this down on the circle of fabric, and I am going to fuse that in place. So I'll take it over here to the press and give it a little shot of heat, and we'll get that fused down, and then we'll be ready to put all things together, get back on the machine, and do some stitching on it. So what I did was just push down the one handle, which gives it a shot of steam, because I thought it's going to fuse a little easier, better, if it has steam. So I'm cooling it off now, drying it out. I'm going to put this down, and then I'm going to put this pattern directly on top of it, and I'm turning it here so it goes along with the white center that I just stitched on, and I'm going to pin it in place through the stabilizer. through everything that I can here so that it really holds in place very well. And after I get it down, then I can stitch it. First of all, as I said, I'm going to straight stitch it all the way around, and then after it's straight stitched, I can tear off all the paper, I can cut off all the extra fabric, and then I can satin stitch. So I'll get moving on this, see how we can work it. And I'm straight stitching again for this first operation, so I'll just straight stitch a little of this. Get it under the foot here. Okay, straight stitch some of it, and I'm going through all those layers. Paper, 2 layers of fabric, stabilizer, the whole thing. And turn so I can turn a little point here. Okay, and it's just stitched around here. And so on. I do that all the way around. And then after I have that all stitched, I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to, I've stitched it all the way around, you realize. Okay, I'm going to tear off that paper because I no longer want it. I no longer need it. I have no use for it at all. And after I have that paper all torn off, then I can tear the rest of it here. Then I can trim this with some little scissors. I can trim it very close to that. And after I have it all trimmed off, I'll just get it out of the way here quickly. But after I have this trimmed all the way around, see how it does puff out? I have that underneath. And then with a satin stitch, so I better change feet or I'm going to hit it. Here's the other foot that I want for a satin stitch, and I'm going to push the little button that gets me into that stitch. And then I shall be ready to go. Here's a good button. Okay. And this is just going to stitch over the edge. So you can see this is an easy way to do it. Rather than cutting that thing out and trying to make it work out just right, I'm going to go a little wider satin stitch. Okay. And when you get up to the point, you would, of course, leave the needle in the fabric, swivel, and go on. But I'll take it out just to show you how it looks when it's finished, since I'm not going to do the whole thing. So there's the start of our morning glory, and you can see how that's really quick and easy to do. Everyone can do that very successfully. This one then has been surrounded by leaves and stems and other things done in either more t-shirt fabric or in a little bit of suede, and we'll have that picture all done. Here's one that's done the same way, a sweater that I have here already finished. This one was traced also. I did not draw this. I am not the artist who drew it. It was traced from a line drawing just on some print fabric. And I did this also with just circles here. Just put the circles down and cut it out later the very way I showed you the morning glory. So easy? Sure it is. You can do that. I had a tablecloth for a long, long time. It was my grandmother's kitchen tablecloth. I remember it as a little girl, and it's all I have of my grandmother. I've had it around forever. Not able to use it because it had holes in it and it had coffee stains on it since it was her kitchen tablecloth. And finally I thought, I know what I'm going to do with that. I'm going to put it on a sweater. Granny would have loved it if I'd cut it up and do something with it. So this is what it is. It looks like, unless you look at it closely, it kind of looks like some sort of a hand knit stitch. It's not at all. It's that old tablecloth, and here I have some in process so you can see it. It is just an old tablecloth, and what I did first of all, as you can see here by the pink big hand stitches, I first of all cut around the motif, around the, in this case, the feathers that were in that tablecloth. It might be fruit or flowers in yours if you have an antique one. I cut around those motifs that were still good, that weren't coffee stained, and then I just stitched it all on, big stitches by hand so that it would be in place. I didn't want to do a close satin stitch around the edge because I didn't want it to look appliqued. I wanted it to look like it was part of the sweater instead, so it would look like a hand knit. So around the edge, all I have here, on all the edges of that lace, I just have a big zigzag stitch, so it really blends in. It doesn't actually show as a satin stitch would. And then I set the machine back on straight stitch and just traced every little bit of the feathers here around. So this one still looks like tablecloth, but once you have all the stitching done, it no longer does. It looks kind of nice then. It looks all puffed and padded out, And this is another fun thing to do. If you don't have an heirloom tablecloth of your own, go to a garage sale and find someone else's for a very small price. You might find just the thing. It would also work to do this on sweaters with doilies, with dresser scarves, anything that you find with a little antique look. If you wanted, in fact, to have some contrast on this, you could also put a colored sweater underneath instead of the matching cream one. So, something you might want to try. It was fun to do. What I still have here on the rack then is a couple of sweaters, and I wanted to do something with them to embellish them, but for a very good reason. What I found about this, I was afraid to do anything to it because it was a silk sweater, and I thought, what if I ruin it? So instead of washing it, as I should have done, I sent it to cleaners, and they ruined it for me. They shrank it so that it was about skin tight, and it was no longer wearable. But I have about 3 different suits that go with it beautifully, and I did not want to discard this because the color was right. So if something's the right color, you like to keep it around to use later. So what I did with this, what could I lose? It wasn't a risk, it wasn't a gamble, because it was a useless sweater. So I didn't know what would happen because I'm actually not a knitter. But I thought, what would happen if I would just cut right through it and make it bigger? And I found it works very well indeed. What I have here on the inside is just the suede. You can see where I cut up the sweater. I just put the bare space over an ironing board and put the sides that I had cut up there. Kind of got it all pinned in place so it would stay up on the ironing board, and then covered it with some suede pieces and stitched it on. Now, why mine worked so well here and why it worked so easily, and by the way, I've done the same thing in the back. I've added a total of 12 inches on this sweater by just cutting it up and spanning the gap there with some ultra suede. You could also do it though with knit fabrics, you could do it with woven fabrics. It doesn't have to be suede fabrics, it can be anything that you like, the colors that go together, and you can do it quite easily. So, you're afraid to cut a sweater? Well, let me show you how easily it does cut. I'm going to bring an old sweater up here. And you can also do this, of course, with new sweater yardage. After I got up, this is a good practice point, in fact. After I got up the courage to cut up an old sweater that I didn't care about, now I have several sweater bodies at home just waiting to be used. That tablecloth sweater that I had a minute ago, in fact, that was a sweater body that I had purchased and then cut it up to make a sweater. But I first did some of this to get up the courage to do it, because not being a knitter, I didn't know what happens if you cut right through that. Is it all going to unravel and you have nothing but a ball of yarn in your lap? And I found no, as long as it's sort of a small gauge knit, then you can just cut right down a rib, which is what I'm doing. I'm just looking at the rib and cutting it vertically right along that rib, and I can cut it all the way through. And nothing happens here. It doesn't fall apart at all. Now, it probably would if you'd have a big hand knit sweater. Any of those that I have are too valuable to cut up and try to see what will happen. I'm not going to experiment on those. I'm only going to experiment on something that's a throwaway. So I don't know what would happen. I suspect that you may have to stay stitch it or do something before you cut. But on this one, on a small gauge machine knit, it's quite all right to just cut right through it. And what made this one so easy is the fact that it already had this band around the neck. And all I had to do, it's a knit band, it was simply machine straight stitched onto the sweater. All I had to do with this is carefully remove the stitching. So this band was up here loose, it was just hanging up here, and the sweater that I cut through then was down below. I didn't touch the band, I didn't cut through it, I only released the stitching on it. So after I did that, it was just the sweater I cut through. But if you don't have a sweater with a band on this that makes this boat neck, you could take any sweater, such as this one, and just go ahead and cut the top off. It wouldn't matter a bit if you'd cut the top off of this and make your own boat neck. So there it goes. Cut the top off that, and what you could put on then to make the band that I have on this sweater is just whatever fabric you're going to fill in with. Whatever that is, make the same band across the shoulders and it'll look complete. It won't look like a redo, it'll look like you intended it that way. So cut up those sweaters, see what you can do with them. This one was a small gauge knit, as I said, so it didn't come open at all. So I added all that and then put the little anemones on top, and that was fun too. Do you have some novelty yarns around? Or go to a yarn shop and find some. Even though I don't knit, I can't resist yarn shops. I love them, and what I do is get small skeins of whatever just really fascinates me. Well, this is a various colored, some silk yarn, and I could get just a small package of it, so I didn't need much. So I made little balls. Remember when you used to make those yarn dolls when you were little? It's that type thing. It's those yarn doll heads, but I just made that little ball and then let the edge all fringe out. What I have underneath for these little flowers is 3-leaf clovers, really. I have 2 3-leaf clovers there, and everything just stitched in place afterwards to embellish it. So it doesn't look like it was just stuck on there to enlarge it. It looks instead like a decoration that was meant to be. Here's the back of it. This also, I just filled in the space. I didn't embellish the back at all. I just filled in the space, but I purposely made these 2 different sizes, made one all the way through to enlarge the whole thing, made this one smaller. I did it purposely because it looks more artistic, don't you think, if it's sort of off balance this way instead of perfectly balanced. I have this last sweater here on the rack, and this one I did the same thing to, really, but this one was going horizontally. I needed this sweater to be about 2 inches longer. And so I did stay stitch this before I cut because it was a bigger knit. Well, enough of this appliquing. So let's wrap up this session and think ahead to next time, which is going to be a wrap session. Not talking to the rhythmic beat type wrap. The wrapping we'll be doing is what happens when you need a little cover up, but don't actually want to coat. So come along and wrap with me next week.